You know, over the past week, I've been taking a few strolls down memory lane, uh, and it's kicked up a few more memories concerning something I kind of touched on a little bit over the past week: folklore, myth of cars, and the stories that have been told about certain things that a lot of people actually believed. You know, it's not surprising. Happens in many areas. You know, and I thought about the ones that I've heard throughout the course of my life from older people, some when I was real young. Quite sure you've heard some stories too, you know, that you say, really? Did that really happen? Uh, you may want to question it when others chose to just believe it. I'll share a few with you that I can recall hearing about. Uh, if you've heard of these car tales, let me know. There are others that you've heard that I'm not aware of, or other people. Feel free to jump in and share your car story. I remember hearing one. This was pretty common. A guy's looking for a real cheap second car for a couple $100. You know, doesn't care what it is, just something that runs. It's kind of dependable, get to work and whatnot. Second car. And he's looking to the classifieds and he sees 63 Chevy, $200. Wow. So he calls. Some guy answers, tells him, "Yeah, it was my son's car. It's in very good condition. He bought it brand new. Then 2 weeks later, he got drafted. He went to Vietnam. He was killed. And we've had the car sitting out in a barn, you know, for several years now. And now we're going to be selling the house. We've got to get it out of there, you know. So we're going to sell the car." Guy says, "Okay, where is it? I'll go take a look at it." Guy shows up, walks in the barn, and there's this bright red 63 Corvette Stingray with a 327 Fuelie with a 4-speed, like brand new, 500 miles on it. He buys it for $200. The old people didn't realize it was worth money to them. It was just an old 63 Chevy. They didn't think it was anything special. You know what I mean? And many of you have heard that story. I remember hearing that one. A lot of people heard it. Then there was one about the neighborhood gas station. You know, back then, every neighborhood had their gas station and mechanic, and our neighborhood was Walter's Garage. And everybody knew him. My father got all his gas there, got his tune-ups there, you know. And back then, believe it or not, you know, people don't like hearing this, but older cars like that, they needed a lot more routine maintenance than today's cars. You know, I can't remember the last time I had to tune up any other vehicles. Change plugs. You know, unleaded fuel has a lot to do with that, too. You know, it doesn't. Uh, Electronic ignition, fuel injection. But back then, carburetors got out of adjustment. Walter was adjusting carburetors. Points would be shot. Complete tune-up was, in many cases, was a routine yearly thing you had to do, and it was points, condenser, rotor, cap, wires, plugs. Sometimes, if you got lucky, they'd clean your plugs and then put your same plugs back in, or your carbon built up from the lead in the fuel. And what, you know, cars required a lot of, you know, maintenance that we don't even think about needing to do on a yearly basis, you know. I know some people won't like hearing this, but uh, yeah, tire rack, recap tires. You don't see that anymore. And then he had another rack with batteries, new and used batteries. He had a couple of stalls. He had a guy that worked for him, another mechanic, the two of them. You know, and everybody in the neighborhood went to Walter's Garage. Got your inspection stickers there, you know. Every neighborhood had a mechanic because you pretty much needed one at one time. And they get to know the people, you know, and they'd pump it for you. There was no self-serve. And then check your radiator, shit like that, check your oil. And they'd sit around and talk, and they'd stick the nozzle in, put it going, and when it was filled, it would click off, you know, and the pump would be ding, 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 ding. This is a story that was told that went around. Anyway, a guy pulls in, he had like some real old, big fucking 20-foot land whale fucking Cadillac. And he goes in, hey, Walt, how you doing? You know, fill it up. And Walter sticks the nozzle in, puts it going. They get talking. They go in the office for something. They're talking and talking. Like 10 minutes goes by. Then suddenly they realize the pump is still dinging. Ding, still fucking pumping. They're like, the fuck? They look. They thought maybe it popped out and gas was all over the ground. They don't see a drop of fucking gas. And it's still fucking running. But then they look at the car and the ass into the car squatting way down like the bumper's over straggling on the fucking ground. They're like, what? Shuts the pump off. Pops open the trunk. The filler tube runs through the trunk and down into the tank. Well, the filler tube was rotted. So when Walter jammed the gas nozzle in, it went through the filler tube into the trunk, and he filled up the trunk with gas, like 100 and something gallons, whatever the fuck it was, right? I remember that story going around. Come to find out it wasn't true, but people believed that story for a long time. Then there was one that was real local, too. In fact, the dealership's still there, Pearson Miller. Audi and Porsche over in our sister city of Fall River, about 15 minutes away, 20 minutes away. They were the only ones around that sold like Porsches and Audis at the time. This was in the 80s. Dealership's still there, but now they're selling Hyundais and Nissans and shit like that, and it's new ownership, new name. The only other Porsche, Audi, Mercedes dealership was next door in Rhode Island, Vidi Brothers in Newport. They're still in business. Anyway, and I remember going by there. You know, stopped and looked one time. You know, that the Porsche 944. It's a pretty nice little car. And at that time, I think they came out in like 82, something like that. 82 or 83 they came out. They had a 924 that the 944 was based on. And the 924 was, it kind of looked like a Datsun 240Z. Datsun was the last time we heard Datsun name, right? Now it's Nissan. You know, the more I think about, you know, memories of things, how many things have changed. And that was a four-banger. It was kind of plain, real straight. The 944 already was a little lower, had a different stance. The wheel wells were flared out, looked like a wide body look to it. They had wide tires, nice wheels, front air dam, rear ducktail spoiler. They were a straight six. You could get it normally aspirated. There was something like 160 horsepower. Then they had the 944S turbo. There was like 250 horse, and those things would outrun a Corvette or anything that was on the road in 1982. That Porsche 944 would eat it alive. I think Z28s and all that shit was like, what, 190 horse, 200 at that time. Corvettes were on the same thing, 200. I think maybe even less. It wasn't until the C4 came out in 84. There was no 83. We know what happened with that. You know, that Crossfire 350, and even that was 200 horse. You know, this Porsche 944 turbo was a pretty nice car. And at that time, the big thing was car alarms. People were putting car alarms in. When out of factory, they started having factory alarms. Remember Chapman? That was a big name, Chapman car alarm. Get it right from the factory. Came with the car. It was an option, you paid for it. But pretty much, the Porsches and Audis that were there, they all had a Chapman alarm system in it. Anyway, back then on Sundays, not many things were open like today. I remember stores were not, everything was closed on a Sunday pretty much. You got a bakery, maybe that was about it. You know, a gas station, shit like that. Car dealerships were closed. You know, I'm sure some things may have been open, but the vast majority of things, nothing was open on a Sunday. Unlike today, more changes. They put these 944s out in the front because it was right before you get to the Harbor Mall that's still there in Fall River. And that was right off of Grand Army Highway, where there's an on-ramp and an exit ramp from I-95 and the mall and high traffic zone. So they put these 944s out there, you know, prominent display, hoping to get attention. People attract them to the lot, to the dealership. When they'd close on a Saturday, they'd move them away from the front. I guess they didn't want them to get damaged or something like that. And they'd move them and they'd park them in the back of the lot behind the other cars in the lot, up against the wall where the service bay was, kind of like out of public sight. I forget how many. It was like 3 or 4. As the story goes, it was like 3 or 4. Anyway, they park them. They leave on a Saturday. They come in on a Monday morning. They go there and cars are gone. And where each car was parked, there's a battery sitting on the ground and a puddle of fluid. I'm like, what the fuck? How'd they steal these cars? They got on. Well, as the story goes, some people to this day still believe that fucking story. Well, the guys knew what they were doing. And when they went there, they brought batteries with them, good working batteries. And they used a long drill. They knew where the batteries were located in the engine bay of the car. And they were right up close to the driver's side fender. They knew where the batteries were located. And they used a long enough drill. They drilled through the fender, into the battery. When all the acid and water drained out of the battery went dead. Alarm wouldn't work. They were able to get in the car, disable the alarm, hot wire it, do whatever they had to do to start it, pop a battery they brought with them in it, started it up, and they drove these cars off the fucking lot and left batteries with holes in them and puddles of acid and water sitting on the fucking ground where these cars were. Well, that was a story that went around for a very long time. To this day, I've heard it mentioned at times. Pretty rare, but I've heard it mentioned on a few occasions over the last 10 years or so. This happened, I guess, in the mid-'80s, according to this story that was told. The cars that came down the assembly line in Detroit, the workers were pissed off because of contract negotiations, so they started fucking up cars on purpose. I remember hearing about cars coming down the assembly line. Did I mention this? 4-door on one side, 2-door on the other side. They're unibodies. I mean, come on, you know what I mean? People have actually believed these fucking stories. I think there's a few more that I've heard through the decades as well. I just can't think of it right now off the top of my head. If you've heard of any, interesting car stories, folklore, wives' tales, car campfire stories, feel free to jump in, I'd like to hear about it. I'm sure my 15, but I'm not bragging. 15 loyal, faithful, loving, trusting, devoted, uncombined groupies. I'm quite sure that they would all enjoy hearing about it as well. Till next time.